My own daughter tried to kick me out of the house I built with my own hands, the place I raised her, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally. I watched in shock as she changed the locks, brought friends to taunt me, and spread lies about me to everyone around us. I felt betrayed, heartbroken, angry, and afraid in my own home, but I refused to give up. I fought back with every ounce of strength, took legal action, and exposed her cruel plans. This is the story of how a mother was betrayed by the child she raised, yet found justice, vindication, and strength she never knew she had. I never thought I'd see the day when my own daughter tried to kick me out of the house I built with my own hands. I raised her, supported her through college, paid her rent when she needed it, and suddenly one morning, she's standing in my living room, pointing at the door saying, "Mom, it's time for you to go." I couldn't believe it. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and all I could think was, how did it come to this? My name is Linda, I'm 68, and I've lived in this house for over 30 years. I raised my daughter, Sarah, practically by myself after her father walked out. I worked 2 jobs, barely slept, but I made sure she had everything she needed. College, trips, even her first car, I paid for it all. After her father passed away, she moved back home to help me out. I welcomed her, of course. I thought we'd enjoy our golden years together. But over time, little things started to change. She became increasingly critical, demanding, and, honestly, rude. It started with small comments, "Mom, you shouldn't spend money on that," or "Why don't you clean up more?" But soon, the comments turned into ultimatums, like I wasn't allowed to make my own decisions anymore. And then came the bombshell. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a lawyer on speakerphone. She said, "Mom, I've been thinking. You really should move out. It's time for me to take over this house. You can live somewhere else." I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but the look on her face said it wasn't. I was stunned. I tried to reason with her. "Sarah, this is my home. I built this house with my own hands. You can't just kick me out." But she interrupted, "Mom, I'm an adult. I pay bills too. It's fair if I get the house." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her about everything I'd done for her, college tuition, trips, her car. "Do you even remember the nights I stayed up worrying about you? Or the money I spent so you could have a good life?" I said, my voice shaking. Her response was cold and calculated. "Times change, Mom. Maybe it's time you downsized. You don't need this big house anymore. I'll take care of it from now on." I was crushed. This wasn't just a disagreement, it was betrayal. The daughter I loved, the girl I'd worked so hard for, was turning her back on me. I spent days crying, pacing the living room, trying to figure out what to do. I even called some friends, asking if I was overreacting. But they all said the same thing, "Linda, you've done nothing wrong. You're being treated unfairly." Then, after a week of silence, she made her move. She changed the locks. She told me she had legal documents, ready to make the eviction official. I stood outside my own house, feeling powerless and heartbroken. I couldn't believe this was happening. I knew I had to fight back. I contacted a lawyer and filed a countersuit, claiming I had every right to stay in my own home. I couldn't just let her take everything I'd worked for. The tension grew so thick, it was like living in a war zone. Every conversation turned into a shouting match. Every glance, a battle. There were days I didn't eat. Nights I couldn't sleep. I felt alone and betrayed, but I also felt a spark of determination. I wasn't going to let my own child push me out of my home. Not without a fight. The days after Sarah changed the locks were the worst of my life. I sat on the porch, staring at the familiar front door that now felt like a stranger, like a barrier between me and the life I had spent decades building. I felt anger, sadness, disbelief, all at once. How could my own daughter, the girl I raised from infancy, turn on me like this? I kept thinking about every time I had stayed up late worrying about her, every penny I had saved to make sure she had a good life, every sacrifice I had made. And now she was acting like I was the problem. I called my lawyer that evening, my voice trembling with frustration and sorrow. "We need to file a countersuit immediately," I said. I will not leave my home." My lawyer tried to calm me, explaining the legal steps, but all I could hear was the betrayal, The raw, suffocating sting of being cast aside by someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. In the following days, Sarah didn't stop. She started putting notes on the door, messages that were meant to be reminders, but felt like taunts. "You need to decide soon, Mom," one read. "This house isn't yours anymore." I kept them in a drawer, but every time I saw them, my chest tightened, my stomach churned. It was personal. It was cruel. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every note, every interaction. My lawyer told me it would help in court, but I didn't need the lawyer's advice to know that what she was doing was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. One afternoon, I tried to talk to her again. I went to her bedroom, knocked softly on the door, and said, "Sarah, can we talk?" She looked up from her laptop, barely lifting her eyes. "There's nothing to talk about, Mom. You need to go. I've made up my mind." My hands shook as I clutched the doorknob. "Sarah, think about what you're doing. This isn't just about the house. This is about us. You're my daughter, and I love you. I've given you everything. Don't throw it all away." She didn't even blink. "Mom, love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't matter here. I want the house. End of discussion." And with that, she went back to scrolling on her phone, leaving me standing there, stunned and humiliated. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, but underneath it all, anger started to simmer. How dare she treat me like I was disposable? I spent nights thinking, planning. I called old friends, distant relatives, anyone who might remember the sacrifices I had made, and slowly, support came. People I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly offering advice, encouragement, and most importantly, reminders that I was not alone. I wasn't the villain in this story, and it was time I stood up for myself. Then came the first unexpected twist. One morning, as I was cleaning the yard, I overheard her talking on the phone. She was laughing, something I hadn't heard in a long time, and she said, "Don't worry, I'll make sure she's out before the weekend." It's easier than I thought. My stomach dropped. The reality hit me like a punch in the chest. She was actively plotting to take everything. I realized I had to escalate. I called my lawyer immediately and explained what I had overheard. We decided to file an emergency injunction to prevent her from taking any legal steps while the countersuit was in progress. I felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. I knew Sarah wouldn't give up easily. The following week, things got worse. She began inviting friends over, letting them wander through the house, sitting in my living room as if they owned it. She would smirk at me when our eyes met. "It's just easier if you accept it, Mom," she said one evening, as she poured wine for her friends. "Everyone's moving on except you." I felt my blood boil. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal, but I stayed calm. I told myself, patience is power. I had a plan. I would let the law and the truth do the talking. But inside, the hurt was unbearable. The neighbors noticed the tension. Some came over, offering subtle support, others tried to stay out of it. I couldn't blame them, this was private, personal. But I felt eyes on me everywhere I went, whispers of sympathy that I wasn't always aware of. And slowly, I began to see cracks in Sarah's confidence. The bravado, the arrogance she displayed in front of her friends, started to fade. She would look around nervously, double-check her notes, make sure she wasn't being watched when she tried to claim parts of the house. It gave me a small sense of satisfaction, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, justice would be on my side. One evening, after a particularly tense day, I sat down in the kitchen with a cup of tea and wrote a letter. Not to her, not to anyone else, but to myself. I wrote down every memory, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. I reminded myself of my worth, my strength, my right to live in the home I had earned. The act of writing was therapeutic. It reminded me that while Sarah could try to take the house, she could never erase the life I had built, the love I had given, or the dignity I carried. I started to feel a sense of control again, a sense of power that had been stolen from me. Then, the court date arrived. I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Sarah was there, looking smug, confident, sure that victory was hers. But as the proceedings began, things took another unexpected turn. My lawyer presented evidence of her attempts to change locks, bring in friends, and intimidate me. Witnesses I had contacted, neighbors, old family friends, even a distant cousin, testified about my lifelong dedication to Sarah and the fact that this house had always been mine. By the end of the day, it was clear that the law was on my side. Sarah's smugness began to crack. She looked around, searching for allies, but found none. The room was silent except for the judge's voice, which finally said, "The countersuit is valid. The plaintiff has the right to remain in her home." As we left the courthouse, I felt a rush of relief and triumph. The fight wasn't over. Sarah could still appeal, but for now, I had won. I had defended myself against betrayal, against cruelty, against someone I once loved more than life itself. And in that victory, I found a sense of justice that was long overdue. I knew that life would never be completely the same with Sarah, but I had reclaimed my home, my dignity, and my peace of mind. And sometimes, just sometimes, that is enough. After the court victory, I thought things might finally calm down. I imagined returning home, sitting in my favorite armchair with a cup of tea, and feeling the comfort of knowing I had defended myself against betrayal. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Sarah didn't accept the loss gracefully. The day after the ruling, she came storming back into the house, her face red with anger, her voice sharp and bitter. "Mom, you think this changes anything? You might have the legal win, but I still live here too. Don't think you're the only one with rights." I looked at her, exhausted and frustrated, and said, "Sarah, this isn't a game. The court has ruled. I have every right to live in my own home. Please, try to understand." She laughed bitterly, a sound that cut deeper than any words could. "Understand? Mom, I don't have to understand. You've always had everything handed to you. Now it's my turn." Her defiance was maddening, but it also revealed something. Sarah had been confident because she thought I would never fight back. Now that she realized I had courage and determination, I saw fear flash across her eyes, quickly replaced by anger. She began testing boundaries, inviting friends over without asking, rearranging furniture, even changing the way I was allowed to use the kitchen. Every time I confronted her, she smirked and said, "You'll get used to it." I felt trapped in my own home, surrounded by the daughter I had raised who had turned into a stranger. One evening, I found a note tucked under my pillow. It was written in Sarah's familiar handwriting. "You may have the law, but you will never break me. I'll make your life miserable until you leave." My hands shook as I read it. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. She wasn't just after the house, she wanted to hurt me, to make me feel powerless and insignificant. I spent the night pacing the living room, thinking of ways to protect myself while still trying to maintain some semblance of peace. I realized that I had to be strategic. Anger alone would not win this battle. I needed patience, documentation, and cunning. Over the next few weeks, Sarah escalated her behavior. She would sneak into rooms I was using, take my things, and accuse me of hogging the house. Once, she even called the police, claiming I was harassing her, something that made me feel both terrified and furious. I had never imagined living through such a nightmare with my own child. I spent hours on the phone with my lawyer, detailing every incident, and he advised me to remain calm and gather evidence. I began recording interactions, taking photographs, and writing detailed logs of her actions. Each entry reminded me of the reality I faced. I was fighting not just for my house, but for my dignity and my sense of self. Then came another twist I hadn't anticipated. One morning, as I was checking my mail, I found a letter from Sarah's college professor. He had heard about our family situation and wrote to express concern. In it, he mentioned that Sarah had exaggerated stories about me being mean and controlling, painting herself as the victim. Suddenly, I realized that her cruelty extended beyond our home. She was trying to manipulate others, to gain sympathy, and to make me look like the villain. The thought made my blood boil, but it also strengthened my resolve. I would not be silenced. I would not be painted as the bad parent when I had given everything to raise her. Around this time, my friends and neighbors began noticing changes too. People who had once been cautious about getting involved started offering quiet support. They would wave, smile, and say things like, "We know the truth, Linda. Don't let her get to you." It was small, but it mattered. I realized that Sarah's power came from isolation. When I began to reclaim support from my community, her control began to slip. Slowly, I started asserting myself in subtle ways, preparing meals without asking her opinion, rearranging furniture how I liked, and even hosting small gatherings of friends in the living room. Each act was a small rebellion, a statement that I was still in charge of my life. But Sarah was relentless. She refused to back down. She began showing up unannounced at my friends' houses, asking invasive questions and spreading gossip. One evening, I found out that she had gone so far as to call one of my oldest neighbors, claiming I was unstable and no longer fit to live alone. My heart sank. The betrayal cut deeper with each lie she told. I felt despair creeping in, but I forced myself to remember the legal protection I had. I remembered the court ruling. I remembered the evidence I had meticulously gathered. And most importantly, I remembered the years I had devoted to raising her, which no amount of manipulation could erase. The next turning point came when I accidentally discovered something that changed everything. Sarah had been careless with her online accounts, leaving her email open on the kitchen computer. Out of curiosity, I glanced at her messages and saw her plans laid bare. She had been secretly attempting to sell parts of the property, contacting contractors without my knowledge, and even plotting to rent out rooms in the house, all to force me into leaving. I felt a mix of anger and vindication. Finally, I had concrete proof of her intentions, proof that she was not just frustrated or confused, she was deliberately trying to take what was mine. I printed every email, every message, and handed them over to my lawyer. The tables were turning. Armed with this evidence, my lawyer filed an update to our case. We presented the emails in court, showing her premeditated attempts to remove me from my home. The judge was visibly shocked, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic cross Sarah's face. She tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The courtroom was tense, the kind of silence that presses down on you until every breath feels heavy. My heart pounded as the judge reviewed the documents, listened to my testimony, and then, finally, looked at Sarah. It is clear that the plaintiff has the right to remain in her home and that any attempts to circumvent this ruling are unacceptable, the judge said firmly. Sarah's face went pale. I could see the realization dawn on her that her game was over, that her attempts at manipulation had failed. Leaving the courthouse that day, I felt a mixture of relief and triumph. The fight wasn't over completely. Sarah could still appeal, but the moral victory was mine. I had defended my home, my dignity, and my life. I had shown that even when betrayal comes from the most unexpected places, courage and perseverance can prevail. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace as I returned to the home that was rightfully mine, determined to protect it and myself from further harm. After the second court victory, I thought I could finally breathe. I imagined peaceful mornings in my kitchen, sipping tea while sunlight streamed through the windows, knowing that, at least for now, I was safe. But Sarah wasn't finished. The moment she realized that the law could not be bent to her will, her behavior turned dangerous and relentless. One evening, I came home to find the front yard littered with trash, flyers with my name on them accusing me of being selfish and unfit to live alone. My heart sank. This wasn't just about the house anymore, it was personal, and it was escalating in ways I hadn't anticipated. The fear I felt was sharp, like a knife pressed against my chest. I had lived in this house for over 30 years, and now, every corner seemed hostile, every shadow a threat. I called my lawyer in a panic, but even he admitted that we were entering a new territory. Linda, he said, this is psychological warfare. We need to prepare for anything. Over the next few days, Sarah's tactics grew more cunning. She would wait until I left the house, then sneak in to move personal items, leaving them in absurd places as if to torment me. One night, I returned home to find my bedroom completely rearranged. My clothes were in boxes, my favorite chair in the living room was overturned. A note lay on the bed, "You can fight in court, Mom, but I own this space now." I felt a wave of nausea and disbelief. I had raised this woman, supported her through every hardship, and now she treated me like a stranger, a trespasser. But beneath the fear, anger began to burn, a slow, steady fire. She might think she could intimidate me, but she underestimated the strength of a mother who has already survived betrayal and loss. The breaking point came one stormy evening. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the living room where Sarah had invited friends over without warning. I walked in, soaked from the rain, and found them laughing, drinking, making plans for the house as if I wasn't even there. My voice trembled as I said, "Sarah, enough. This ends tonight. I am your mother, and this is my home." She smirked, raising a glass. "Mom, maybe you should finally accept it. The house is mine now. You can leave whenever you're ready." Rage surged through me. I clenched my fists, my knees weak, but I forced myself to stay calm. I will not leave, and I will not be humiliated in my own home. Leave, or I will call the authorities. Her friends laughed nervously, sensing the tension, and one by one, they left. Sarah stayed, her face pale now, but defiance still flickering in her eyes. We stood there, facing each other, the storm outside mirroring the storm inside the room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice that was almost a whisper, she said, "You think you've won, Mom? You haven't seen the last of me." I looked at her, the daughter I had raised, and for the first time, I saw not just defiance, but fear. She realized that her actions had consequences, and that the mother she had underestimated was not only resilient but relentless. Over the next week, the tension reached a fever pitch. Sarah tried everything, threatening neighbors, calling the police with false accusations, and even attempting to trick me into signing documents that would give her control of the house. But I had prepared. Every interaction, every move she made, was documented. Every threat recorded, every deception exposed. I began to feel a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about the house, it was about proving that betrayal, no matter how close it comes, can be confronted and overcome. Then came the ultimate moment of confrontation. One night, I returned home to find Sarah in the living room, standing beside a stack of boxes labeled with my belongings. Her face was set, determined, but there was a flicker of hesitation. I walked in, calm but firm, and said, "Sarah, take one step closer to those boxes, and I will call the police. This ends tonight." She laughed bitterly, but this time it was shorter, less certain. "Mom, you think threats will scare me? I've done nothing wrong." I shook my head slowly. "You've done everything wrong. Every lie, every attempt to manipulate and intimidate, every betrayal, it ends now. I will not be driven out of my home by my own child." The room was tense, the storm outside echoing our confrontation. And then, something remarkable happened. One of her friends, who had stayed in the background, finally spoke up. "Sarah, this is too much. She's your mother. This isn't right." The words hit her like a mirror, reflecting back the cruelty she had been hiding behind. Her defiance faltered, her eyes darted around the room, and suddenly, for the first time, she seemed small, uncertain. I felt a surge of vindication. This was the turning point. She had relied on intimidation and manipulation, but the truth was now clear, not just to me, but to everyone around her. In the days that followed, Sarah's attacks lost their intensity. She still tried small acts of rebellion, but her confidence had shattered. I continued documenting, continued asserting my rights, but now with a sense of calm and control. My friends and neighbors quietly supported me, offering small gestures of solidarity that strengthened my resolve. I realized that victory wasn't just legal, it was moral. The child who had sought to destroy me was slowly unraveling under the weight of her own choices. And then came the final court hearing. I walked into the courtroom, my heart steady, my resolve unshakable. Sarah's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw fear. My lawyer presented all the evidence, the threats, the manipulations, the attempts to force me out. The judge listened intently, reviewing every document, weighing every word. Sarah tried to argue, but her defenses crumbled under the weight of truth. The judge's final words echoed through the room. The plaintiff has the right to remain in her home. Any further attempts to undermine this ruling will result in severe legal consequences. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Justice had been served. Leaving the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in months. The storm had passed, and for the first time, I felt safe in my own home again. Sarah would have to face the consequences of her actions, and I had reclaimed not just my house, but my dignity and peace of mind. The confrontation, the fear, the betrayal, they had all tested me, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and victorious. And in that victory, I felt a sense of justice that was both satisfying and deeply healing. After the final court ruling, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though nothing could erase the months of stress, fear, and betrayal I had endured. Walking through my home, every corner reminded me of the battles fought and the victories won. The living room, once a battlefield of arguments and standoffs, now felt like a sanctuary. I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of tea warming my hands, and allowed myself to finally breathe. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt safe, respected, and, most importantly, in control of my own life. Sarah, of course, did not vanish quietly. She sulked through the house, her eyes avoiding mine, muttering under her breath. Friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves as they realized the depth of her manipulations and cruelty. One neighbor, who had been particularly close to her, finally told me, "Linda, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. She had me fooled. But now, it's clear whose side the truth is on." It was a small comfort, yet it carried immense weight. People who once whispered about the drama now offered quiet solidarity, helping me feel less isolated, less alone in the war that had raged in my own home. Over the following weeks, Sarah's defiance waned further. She stopped inviting friends over without permission, ceased moving my belongings, and her attempts to undermine me fell flat. One afternoon she confronted me, her voice trembling for the first time. "Mom, maybe I went too far." I looked at her, my heart heavy with lingering pain, but also tempered with the calm of someone who had endured and survived. "Sarah," I said quietly, "it's not about winning. It's about understanding that actions have consequences, and trust cannot be broken without cost." She didn't respond, only looked away, and for the first time, I sensed genuine remorse. But I also knew that some lessons, once learned, could not erase the past, they could only shape the future. The psychological toll of the ordeal remained. I spent nights awake, replaying moments, conversations, and decisions. But each day, as I moved through my home, I reminded myself of my strength. I had been tested in ways that many never experience. Betrayal, deceit, threats, they had all come from the one person I had loved most in the world. Yet I had faced it, documented it, defended myself, and ultimately prevailed. I realized that the real victory was not just legal, it was moral, emotional, and deeply personal. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my dignity. A particularly striking moment occurred when I discovered that Sarah had attempted to manipulate her friends into thinking I was unstable. They had called me repeatedly, asking if I was okay, if I needed help, expressing concern. I realized then that, despite her efforts, the truth could not be buried. Lies, no matter how persistent, eventually crumble when faced with consistency, patience, and honesty. This insight gave me a renewed sense of empowerment, reinforcing the lesson that integrity and persistence are invaluable weapons against betrayal. The months that followed were not without tension, but I began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. I invited friends over, hosted small gatherings, and re-established routines that had been disrupted by Sarah's actions. I even started working on the garden, a space that had always brought me peace but had been neglected during the chaos. Each flower planted, each vegetable nurtured, felt symbolic of my resilience, of life continuing despite adversity, and of reclaiming spaces that had once felt hostile. Sarah, on her part, gradually retreated. She moved some of her belongings out of the house, spending more time away, and began to rebuild her own life. There were moments of awkward silence between us, but the storm had passed. I realized that some bonds, once tested by betrayal, could never be the same, yet distance and time could heal wounds enough for civility and coexistence. I accepted that our relationship would be complicated, perhaps strained for years, but I had survived, and that was enough. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the yard I had tended for decades, I reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all been intense and overwhelming. Yet in surviving it, I had discovered a deeper strength than I had ever known. I had defended my home, my autonomy, and my sense of self against the one person who had tried to take it all away. And in that survival, I found not only justice but also clarity. Betrayal, when met with courage and perseverance, does not define the victim, it defines the one who committed it. The moral of this story, I realized, was simple yet profound. Life will test us, often in ways we cannot predict, and sometimes the trials come from those we love most. But resilience, preparation, and a steadfast commitment to truth and integrity can overcome even the most intimate betrayals. There is a measure of karmic justice in the world, and though it may take time to reveal itself, it will. Sarah had learned, in her own way, the consequences of her actions. And I had emerged not only victorious but strengthened, with a renewed sense of self-worth and a home restored not just to its physical state, but to a sanctuary of peace and dignity. Looking back now, I am reminded of the quiet power of persistence. The months of fear, anger, and uncertainty were dark, yes, but they taught me that one can survive anything if one refuses to surrender. The house I had built, the life I had nurtured, the sacrifices I had made, they were not erased by betrayal. And as I sit in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, I feel a sense of justice, a sense of closure, and a profound gratitude for the strength I discovered in defending myself. I had been tested, I had endured, and I had prevailed. And that, in the end, is a victory no one can take away.